And now let's talk about masks, specifically masks in schools. 4 days ago, Francis Collins, who is the director of the NIH, which is the National Institute of Health, he had an interview where he shed some light on why exactly they're pushing kids to wear masks in school. And he indicated that the real reason kids are being forced to wear masks is more so to avoid school closures rather than to keep them healthy based on data. During an interview on a conservative radio show earlier this week, this NIH director was asked by the host about the recent federal recommendations that children in kindergarten through 3rd grade should be wearing masks in school. And in response, Francis Collins said that although it's rare for young children to get COVID, students who don't wear a mask could cause an outbreak at school, forcing everyone to go back to remote learning. Here's specifically what he said. It is still pretty rare, but it is not zero, and we now have more than 400 kids that have died of this. So we have to think about that. If they're unmasked in the classroom, you know what's going to happen. There's going to be an outbreak. And then what happens? The kids go back home again. That's a bad outcome. So even if you're not worried about their personal health, if you're worried about the fact that we want them to stay in school, the masks may be an important way to achieve that. The host of the program, who by the way is named Hugh Hewitt, he noted that kids in kindergarten through 3rd grade are vulnerable to speech development problems if they can't see people's full faces. And then he asked this NIH director whether kids are at greater risk of either hospitalization or serious illness if they take off their mask. To which Mr. Collins, he responded by saying this: "I wish we had that data, but Hugh, I don't think you're hearing me. It's not just about that." And this is exactly where the exchange got interesting. Because at this point, the host accused the federal government of just basing their decisions on guesswork because they didn't have data. However, Mr. Collins explained that the health officials are not guessing, and once again pointed to the recent reports about school districts closing their classrooms down because of COVID outbreaks. And so, his argument is essentially that even though kids themselves are at a very, very low risk of getting sick, if there's an outbreak in a classroom, many districts will just send everybody home. And in order to avoid this, everyone should be wearing masks. And upon hearing this, the host argued that the school districts were overreacting to these cases since there is no data showing that the risk of suffering from severe COVID symptoms outweighs the risk of developing speech deficits. And then the host said this: "I think we've created a concern about panic with outbreaks among children when the children do not demonstrate any significant symptoms. I don't think you have any data showing that there is a significant greater risk of being sent home than lifelong learning deficits." And in response to that, and this is sort of the crux of the whole conversation, the NIH director responded by saying this: "I don't think we have the data on either side of it, Hugh. I think right now we're all trying to do the best we can. The CDC really hates to have to make recommendations based on anecdotes, but sometimes it's what you've got at the time." And so, it seems like what this conversation appears to show is that the reason kids are being forced to wear masks in school is not necessarily because of safety, but rather, school districts throughout the entire country have shown a tendency to send everybody home if there's any COVID outbreaks, regardless of whether those outbreaks are actually dangerous to the kids. And just for your reference, by the way, in their latest version of the school reopening guidelines, the CDC recommends universal indoor masking by all students, all staff members, all teachers, and as well as all visitors to K through 12 schools, regardless of their vaccination status. Meaning that if this continues for a long time, think about it, there might be an entire generation of kids who have only on very rare occasions seen people's full faces. Furthermore, and this is something that we discussed in a previous episode, these masks that kids wear aren't necessarily clean. In fact, a few weeks ago, there was a group of parents over in Gainesville, Florida, which is a city in the north of the state, and they had concerns about their children being forced to wear masks at school all day long in 90-degree heat. And so what these parents did is that they took 6 face masks from their kids and sent them over to the University of Florida in order to be analyzed for contaminants. And for your reference, by the way, out of these 6 masks, 3 of them were surgical masks, 2 of them were cotton, and 1 of them was a polyester neck gaiter. Furthermore, they also sent in some unused masks to be used as a control sample. And after running their analysis, the laboratory over at the University of Florida, they detected the presence of 11 dangerous pathogens on these masks, including bacteria that cause diphtheria, pneumonia, as well as meningitis. And furthermore, 5 of the masks were found to be contaminated with parasites, fungi, and bacteria. And besides that, other less harmful pathogens were detected on the masks as well, like ones that cause ulcers, acne, as well as strep throat. And it's interesting to note that none of the control samples, meaning that the masks that were never worn, were contaminated with these pathogens, meaning likely that a bunch of kids sitting together in 90-degree heat for 5 or 6 hours a day somehow find ways to get bacteria on their masks. Now, by the way, if you'd like to read that full study for yourself, I'll throw it into the description box below this video so you can dig through it for yourself. Regardless, as we've already mentioned earlier, the CDC has recommended that all students throughout the entire country wear masks while in school. And while that is just a recommendation by the CDC, it is being enacted by different states throughout the entire country. For instance, the governor of Oregon recently imposed a statewide indoor mask mandate. Washington, D.C. did the same thing, as did New Mexico. And of course, when you look at a map, other states are following suit as well. In fact, take a look at this map here, and you'll see that most states either require masks, they require masks for students who aren't vaccinated, or they allow individual school districts to decide for themselves whether to mandate masks or not. Very, very few states prohibit schools from mandating masks at all. And why exactly is that? Well, let's take a look at Florida as an example. 3 weeks ago, Governor Ron DeSantis signed an executive order which prohibited all of Florida's school districts from imposing blanket mask mandates on their students. He then went even one step further and added that if there are school districts which violate this order and actually enforce mask mandates on their students, they will have their paychecks withheld. Here's specifically what the governor's office said in a statement. For example, the State Board of Education could move to withhold the salary of the district superintendent or school board members as a narrowly tailored means to address the decision makers who led to the violation of law. However, since the state doesn't actually directly control these salaries, they have to take a circuitous route. Here's specifically what the governor's press secretary told us here at the Epoch Times. The state does not and has never managed the payroll for local officials. These superintendents and school board members aren't state employees. Therefore, the only way the state could ever tailor the financial penalties to hold accountable the few officials who made the decision to break the law would be to withhold state funding in the exact amount of those officials' salaries. And so, school administrators in Florida risk having their salaries docked if they impose mask mandates on their students. Now, the reason that Ron DeSantis took this course of action is because he says that these types of decisions should be left up to the parents, not school officials. Here's specifically what he said on that front. With respect to enforcing any financial consequences for non-compliance of state law regarding these rules, and ultimately the rights of parents to make decisions about their children's education and healthcare decisions. However, regardless of the consequences, several school districts went ahead and imposed mask mandates anyway. For instance, Broward County has voted 8-1 in favor of keeping their mask mandates in place. Here's what one of their board members was quoted as saying. "Lose our salaries? Bring it. When you put that out there, it makes me work harder for our school children and families." Likewise, the superintendent of Alachua County wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post saying that it's her duty to impose a mask mandate under the Florida Constitution. Here's part of what she wrote. "I value life too much to take chances with the lives of others, even under the threat of retaliation. As our school board chair has so aptly put it, better a loss of funding than a loss of lives. We don't have the luxury of ignoring the current crisis to score political points." Likewise, the superintendent of Miami-Dade County, he said that he is still considering imposing a mandate and added this. "At no time shall I allow my decision to be influenced by a threat to my paycheck, a small price to pay considering the gravity of this issue and the potential impact to the health and well-being of our students and dedicated employees." And now, the White House has jumped into the fray as well, saying that they will actually reimburse any school district that gets its funding pulled by the DeSantis administration. Specifically, Miguel Cardano, who is the Secretary of Education at the federal level, he wrote a letter to Ron DeSantis saying that the Biden administration will ensure that any school district that has its state funding reduced as a punishment can draw from the $7 billion relief fund that was recently approved by Congress. Here's specifically what he wrote in that letter. "I am deeply concerned about Florida's July 30th executive order prohibiting school districts from adopting universal masking policies consistent with CDC guidance. The department stands with these dedicated educators who are working to safely reopen schools and maintain safe in-person instruction." And so it looks like these 3 counties which have defied Ron DeSantis' order, which are once again Alachua, Leon, and Broward counties, they will be compensated by the Biden administration. However, after this move, Ron DeSantis actually criticized Joe Biden for focusing on the wrong aspects of this whole problem. Here's what he said in the statement. And what has he done? He has imported more virus from around the world by having a wide open southern border. You have hundreds of thousands of people pouring across every month. And again, as the NIH director pointed out in that interview we discussed earlier, it's unclear what positive impacts these mask mandates in school are having at all.
I think you all know that I've always felt the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
I look at freedom and I appreciate that.
Breakthrough Media.